interaction style versus worldview versus temperament, basically. The four temples also have their own temperaments, and it took me a while to actually realize this. I know some of you, especially Duggo and Uberserker of all people, who have already realized that, and there's a few other people who've realized that. It's not that the concept is realized, it's more of like how. Like, how does the worldviews actually manifest from the temple perspective, right? I've been noodling on this for a while, and it started with a conversation that I had with the team examining the pragmatism of introverted sensing versus the pragmatism of introverted intuition. Because while introverted sensing in of its own right is technically an affiliative function on its own, when you look at it from the perspective of the temples, that is not the case. It's actually a pragmatic function in terms of the temples when you look at the God functions, right? So God functions end up having a completely different view in terms of the affiliative versus pragmatic worldview or temperament that would be typically attached to basic functions. You know what I'm saying? And this is a really fascinating point, because when you actually think about it, what we consider from a type grid perspective, just base nature, what we consider from a type grid perspective, it's like, okay, well, hey, here you go. You have this assumption as to which of the individual functions are pragmatic versus affiliative. But when you consider the temples and the God functions, that actually ends up changing. And the reason why is because how the God functions end up working with each other and combine with each other in order to create a specific outcome, which is pretty awesome if you think about it. It's really awesome. And never exactly thought about how or why until I started actually examining, okay, how is this typically considered affiliative function actually pragmatic, right? And then I came to a couple of conclusions and then went out in the field and started testing some of those conclusions to see if they actually matched or if they actually had merit. And I would like to say that they definitely did actually end up having merit in some capacity, shockingly enough, which was great. It was really great to be able to see that happening. But it really comes down to God functions, because the God functions themselves, as we've been discussing, but from a God function perspective, I maintain that you can utilize the God functions themselves to actually translate the specific worldview of the four temples themselves. And one of the ways that I was able to break this down, or at least come to the conclusion, basically. And yes, thank you, Fib, for updating the stream, because in doing so, from this perspective, I think I'll probably doing a lot more live streams in person in this regard moving forward, except that the stream has to be created ahead of time with my phone. We can't create it on the back end like using a desktop browser, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong though, but we'll have to verify that. So anyway, so it all started with like a lot of discussion. I was recently on the TNT radio show with Joseph Arthur, the Technicolor Dreamcast. A great show. If you guys haven't watched that show yet or listened to the show, the link is in the announcements channels on the Discord server. So please check that out, because I talk about a few interesting concepts in there, as well as just, psychoanalyze Mr. Arthur. But one of the concepts that I talked about is like this basic enmity between the heart temple and the mind temple, in as much as there is also enmity between the soul temple and the body temple. And trying to understand like where this enmity actually is coming from, where does it stem from, why is that enmity actually there, at least how does it manifest in our daily lives, that was something that took me a while to kind of get my head around. I know Chris has shared a lot of his opinions about that so far, And for the most part, I do agree with his conclusions that he has. But I've been able to draw like a different set of conclusions because I wanted to be able to dig deeper and actually just figure out, okay, well, what is actually fundamentally happening here? Why is there enmity between the heart temple and the mind temple? And what I was explaining to Mr. Joseph Arthur is that the reason why mind temple hates, or heart temple hates mind temple and vice versa, it's because of the macro concept of revolution. You know, I mean, I was those kids that was addicted to Toonami back in the day. I would sneak Cartoon Network, Toonami, watching Gundam Wing, any opportunity that I could. Well, one day, one Christmas, there was a Gundam Wing movie that came out called The Endless Waltz. And The Endless Waltz is basically the endless waltz of war and the endless waltz of, revolution leading to war, leading to peace, leading to revolution, to war, to peace, and this endless waltz of humanity over and over and over. Well, that endless waltz actually permeates the relationship between the mind temple and the heart temple. That's ultimately what this endless waltz actually is, because the mind temple ends up bringing order. That's really what its purpose is bringing order, right? That is its worldview, the worldview of order, right? The New World Order. Every time anyone talks about New World Order, it's really, or Novus Ordo Seclorum, that's always basically the mind temple, essentially. That is what the mind temple is trying to do, right? Bring things into order. And it does this from its God function perspective, right? The God function perspective of introverted thinking and extroverted sensing, which basically ends up translating the worldview into the following theme, which is, I know best, and because I know best, you should do this. You should comply because I'm the person that knows the most. I know best, so you should. I know you should. I know you should. That's the overall theme. And that's TI and SE basically combined together, right? Obviously, the ISTP kind of represents I know you should the most within the mind temple. And yet, isn't it any wonder that the ISTP archetype itself is actually the one that ends up shaping social norms the most, trying out social norms and shaping social norms the most for the rest of humanity? It's the ISTP that does that. So, because I know best, you should, right? You should comply. So, we had a question that says, is this entity about God function incompatibility? I'm not sure. This is the Cutting Edge podcast where we can discuss these types of things, but I'm not entirely sure about that. Not really. Not really sure. So I know you should. So because of this, they end up wanting to bring things into order. And that's what they end up doing. They bring order. The problem is that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And when it's corrupting absolutely, and from that point of view, it ends up becoming a serious problem. And this is where the heart temple comes in. Because so long as the heart temple comes in, it has this tendency to start a lot of trouble. And isn't it any wonder that the God functions of the heart temple just happen to be introverted intuition and extroverted feeling, right? But then again, it's like, well, hold on. What is the champion type, of the heart temple to be able to actually do that? Most people would say, well, is that INTJ? Well, hold on, they have extroverted feeling trickster, right? Well, is it the ENTP? Well, hold on, they have introverted intuition nemesis, right? Is it the ISFJ, right? They have extroverted feeling parent, but introverted intuition demon, right? Is it the ESFP, who has extroverted feeling critic and introverted intuition inferior? Which means only one of these God functions are actually within the ego, which I find absolutely fascinating. So I don't really know the true answer in that case. I don't really know which would be the champion. However, I do know one thing about heart temple is that the starter type within the heart temple, also known as the ENTP, my type, just happens to be the type that spawns revolution to challenge that order and to challenge that power consistently throughout history. The United States of America exists because an ENTP came up with the idea of the American Revolution, and that man was Benjamin Franklin. This country would not exist without him because he's the one who had the original idea for the American Revolution. Now, it's so funny how oftentimes when you hear about people talking about how there is no such thing as an original idea, have you guys ever noticed that the people who claim that there is no such thing as an original idea just happen to be Mind Temple? Have you ever noticed that? I've noticed that. It's one of the reasons why I have such a hard time with Mind Temple, if you think about it, right? So this ends up becoming a problem over time. So with that being said, revolution is spawned by the Heart Temple over and over and over. And without Heart Temple, humanity may oftentimes be at the risk of being enslaved by the Mind Temple and the Mind Temple's cognitive origins of authority, as the Mind Temple seeks validation, and it has to get validation by ultimately bringing order and controlling all of the rest of humanity, and from that perspective. And the most powerful man on the earth, the head of the Rothschild family, he himself is an INFP, and he rules with basically absolute power throughout the earth, with the exception of maybe what Russia and China is doing. But who knows, maybe what's happening in Russia and China is actually entirely based on his will through the Mind Temple that is imposed on the rest of humanity. We don't really know. But he is the most powerful human being on the planet, without a doubt. Without a doubt. The amount of resources and influence this man has, he's basically unchallengeable. But that's why Heart Temple exists. I talked about a concept that I've talked about many times here within the Ego Hacker community with Mr. Joseph Arthur and ESTP, and that's the concept of mental eugenics, and how eventually, once our technology is widely available, there's a chance that the Mind Temple will utilize Jungian analytical psychology and Forsyth's dynamics to create a predictive AI system that could predict basically the psyches of children before they are even born, or just as they are born, which would allow them the opportunity to create a world of mental eugenics, where they are basically selectively removing certain individuals in order to prevent, for example, Heart Temple from ever creating revolution that would ultimately challenge its power. The God functions of the Heart Temple is introverted intuition, which is known as personal freedom, and extroverted feeling, which is known as acceptability. But what is the main theme of the Heart Temple? What is the main passion of the Heart Temple? What is the worldview of the Heart Temple? Dare I say, the worldview of the Heart Temple was actually uniquely coined by the Declaration of Independence, actually. A declaration, hey, here's our declaration, a social thing, right? And it's independent because it's introverted intuitive, right? So this is why the Heart Temple itself is actually a pragmatic temple. It's a pragmatic temple. Whereas the Mind Temple is an affiliative one, a very affiliative temple. But what is the worldview, the specific worldview that is based upon the Declaration of Independence that the Heart Temple subscribes to, that ultimately becomes an ultimate threat to the Mind Temple? What is it? The theme basically is when you combine introverted intuition, God function, with extroverted feeling, God function, the theme you end up getting is the pursuit, NI, of happiness, FE. I am constantly trying to raise the acceptability of other people, men and women. That's what we're doing with the nonprofits, that's what we're doing with the men and women's groups and the programs that we have available for them, and that we are building right now, and we're building teams and volunteers and whatnot to actually accomplish that. But the reality of the situation is, it all comes down to raising one's acceptability or raising the acceptability of others. For what purpose? For the pursuit of happiness. The thing is that absolute power corrupts absolutely. Heart Temple understands this, from this perspective. And due to that absolute power, Heart Temple has to challenge the Mind Temple, because the Mind Temple has a way of like, well, I know best, so you should do this. So because of that, the Mind Temple exerts a lot of force on top of humanity. And force is basically the opposite of introverted intuition. So maybe the gentleman who commented earlier in the stream is absolutely correct from that perspective. Because NI does not like being told what to do, right? Mind Temple should be working with Heart Temple to achieve an order that does not stifle the pursuit of happiness. The problem is that the Mind Temple always ends up stifling that pursuit of happiness every single time. And this is why we always have revolution every single time. And that's why human beings will always be at war. Always. And there's nothing they could do to get away from that or get around that. It will always happen. Ultimately, another example as to why we have the fourth turning. Because Mind Temple ends up getting out of control. Mind Temple ends up getting out of order, right? So then Heart Temple takes advantage of this new disorder because they are out of order, right? Because absolute power corrupts absolutely, and then Heart Temple rises to the occasion as a result of the pursuit of happiness, which another way of defining the pursuit of happiness in terms of the God functions, the translation literally is, I want to be acceptable. I want everyone to be acceptable. I want everyone to be happy. I want to be happy. The pursuit of happiness, folks. That is the worldview of the Heart Temple. And that is why it is pragmatic versus the Mind Temple, which is affiliative. But let's discuss another affiliative temple. And is it any wonder that this particular temple is constantly in sexual relationships with the Mind Temple on a regular basis? Is it any wonder? It's not. It's not any wonder. The reality of the situation is that the Soul Temple is the other affiliative temple. Because from their perspective, I'm desirable if I'm a good person, right? I'm here to make, people good, right? People need to be good. And as long as they are good, right, that is what is desirable. That's what makes humanity ultimately desirable if they are good people, right? And for some reason, Soul Temple ends up getting gaslit by the Mind Temple consistently, where the Soul Temple is like, oh, well, if we follow the rules, that means we're good people, right? If we follow the rules, right? And they end up getting with Mind Temple as a result, because it's like, oh, they follow the rules, right? And the same reason why oftentimes the Heart Temple, with their pursuit of happiness, ends up getting with Body Temple. Body Temple is all about exploration and discovery. It's all about purpose, right? And the thing is that if I'm in the pursuit of happiness, that means, it's implied I'm going to be exploring a little bit. And perhaps the pursuit of happiness is actually my purpose as a member of the Heart Temple. So it's actually really easy for the Heart Temple to come to know their purpose, right? It's pretty easy for them to come to know that purpose. And it draws Body Temple in, because Body Temple's like, well, I want purpose. I see that you're a natural explorer because you have that pursuit of happiness. So, ergo, Body Temple and Heart Temple end up getting together. And they are both pragmatic temples, in as much as the Soul Temple trying to do the right thing, try to make people good, trying to make people desirable, because the most desirable person is a good person. That's the theme of the worldview of the Soul Temple. The most desirable person is a good person. The problem is the Mind Temple, for some reason, is able to convince the Soul Temple that, hey, just because, you're only a good person if you follow the rules, because I know best, so you should do this, right? So the extroverted intuition God function ends up being taken advantage of by the Mind Temple. And yes, I understand I'm very biased with this viewpoint, because I am Heart Temple, and I am using the basis of this lecture as me shitting on Mind Temple by default. I apologize in advance, but I can't help it, right? I can't help it. So, the point is, the reality of the situation is that with Soul Temple going in this perspective, their job is to make people better. The problem is they themselves are the worst people. And it's always funny how we're oftentimes, on this level of extremes. The worst people end up becoming the best examples of good people. You see what I'm saying? So that's what ends up happening. That's where it goes. That's why it exists, right? So the soul temple ends up often being in league with the mind temple, and they are all affiliative. It's all about being affiliative. It's like, oh yeah, we're the people who do the right thing, and oftentimes soul temple and mind temple end up looking down on the rest of the human race as a result. But why is the body temple pragmatic? What's in it for them? Because the reality of the situation is, while their God functions are introverted sensing, which is usually seen as an affiliative function, doing what a person should, doing their duty, basically, that's not the context of the body temple. That's not really the context. What is the context? Well, the context of that temple is exploration. I get the opportunity to hang out with a lot of ISFPs. I've been hanging out with a lot of ISFP women recently within my entourage, and just ones that I know in my life. And the thing is that if an ISFP lacks freedom, they become very idle. And that idleness is basically proof of their depression. When they aren't producing, when they're not being generative, basically, which is one of the temple wheel spokes of the temple wheel of their shadow wheel, basically. It's attached to discovery, the cognitive version of discovery. So from that perspective, if they don't have any freedom, then they can't take the time to, quote, explore their purpose, basically. They need that, right? Well, introverted sensing as a God function is all about exploration. That's why discovery is attached to the introverted sensing God function. And then we also have the extroverted thinking God function, which is the God function relating to achievement. So if they don't have the freedom to achieve, if they do not have the freedom to explore, then it's all going to shut down. They need it. In order for them to even have legacy in their life, to be remembered, to have something to pass down to future generations, they'll have to do it. But they're very pragmatic, to the point oftentimes they will stop at nothing to explore. Much like how, there's this movie called Oppenheimer right now. It's out, and he's pragmatic, right? And he's got cognitive origin of discovery, Mr. Oppenheimer does. And he's discovering basically how to make a nuclear weapon, right? It's a very pragmatic thing because, the ends justify the means, right? The ends justify the means. And this is why the soul temple hates the body temple. Because they know that if the body temple is left unchecked, the body temple is going to produce a dark legacy. A legacy that may actually inhibit the human race from actually being good people. Because if the human race was good, for example, then from that perspective, what would end up happening is that nuclear weapons wouldn't exist because that knowledge would be contained. And then all of a sudden, the soul temple starts whining and running to mind temple for order and for containment, to put rules and containment around body temple's dangerous discoveries, right? Just look at all the suppressed technology that has happened since the late 1800s till now. The first electric car, I believe, was actually invented in the late 1800s, okay? So, but apparently we don't care about that, right? And now Elon Musk, who is part of Body Temple, is hailed as this great engineer, this great person, Tesla, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't a discovery. He doesn't own that discovery, yet he will own the legacy. He will, which is funny, at least for now. Because, as we learn from the magician archetype of the mature masculine, knowledge that lacks containment ends up having devastating effects. And this is what Soul Temple's main problem with the body temple is, because if the body temple goes unchecked, who knows how many times Pandora's box will be opened by the body temple that would potentially keep the human race stuck in an endless cycle of being bad people, right? Dangerous people, where ultimately the body temple's legacy could be to wipe out the entire human race. And the soul temple is very, very concerned. This is why the soul temple likes to combine powers with the mind temple in order to bring body temple to heal, right? In as much as the mind temple ends up uniting with the soul temple in order to bring the heart temple to heal, to try to quell the rebellion, right? That way we can have our magic old boys club, you know, where only certain people are allowed in our old boys club so that we can keep our power and make sure that our power is never challenged again by the heart temple. Because obviously we're keeping body temple under heal for you, soul temple, and we know best, right? Because we're the ones that have all of the knowledge, right? Oh, and I entirely agree with Fib with that statement. Even Nikola Tesla basically stated that he believed that he could actually split the earth in half as a result of some of the technologies and the discoveries that he came up with. A very dangerous technology where he literally could destroy the earth. So the thing is that soul temple is technically right. Body temple, if left unchecked, is entirely dangerous. And then all of a sudden, mind temple sees heart temple as this, oh, you nice pursuit of happiness people you got there. You're just going to keep enabling the body temple, because they enable each other. As much as soul temple and the mind temple enable each other. And they end up having these toxic enablement relationships. It's like they have these natural pairs and they're enabling each other right into the ground. Because, if you notice, even the sexual relationships between these two temple sets, mind temple plus soul temple, and heart temple plus body temple, it's not a golden pair relationship. No, it's a natural pair relationship. It is a relationship of enablement, and they enable each other, which can be very dangerous. My friend and colleague, Chris Taylor, has this amazing opinion about how humanity hasn't really grown anytime soon. And it's so funny to me because the reason humanity hasn't grown, it's not because of the heart temple. It's not because of the body temple. It's actually because they are enabling the mind temple, actually. So I lay that at soul temple's feet, right? I lay that at their feet. But then again, the counter argument is, well, hey, we should stay in power because we've kept body temple in check from destroying the world. So what's that worth it to you there, soul temple, right? So fascinating. So fascinating that that's how these worldviews within the temples actually play out. So fascinating. So dangerous, if you think about it. It just goes to show that no one temple is absolutely right. Because here's the thing. Here's the problem with heart temple. Here's its huge hang-up. The pursuit of happiness oftentimes becomes selfish to the point where it's their pursuit of their own happiness, much to the expense of other people, right? Which is a huge problem. That's a huge problem. Because if left unchecked, the heart temple will put itself above the rest of humanity and it will be willing to sacrifice everybody else's happiness for the sake of its own. And mind temple knows that. You see? So really, it's this giant chess game. It's this giant rock, paper, scissors approach between the four temples. Consistently. And as much as it is a rock, paper, scissors approach from the four temperaments, guardians, artisans, intellectuals, and idealists, not one of them has a political viewpoint that actually helps anybody. Oligarchy, right? Versus anarchy, versus autocracy, also known as totalitarianism, versus communism. See, they all fail. Guess what? The temples also fail entirely. So humanity, as a result, because of this, will always be in this constant cycle of harmony versus conflict, left on its own. Which, if you think about it, is chaos. Which, if you think about it, proves that we are, in fact, a solipsistic race. So then what ends up happening is that you look at the temples now from two perspectives. Two. Those two perspectives is self above tribe and tribe above self. Each of their worldviews can actually be expressed self above tribe versus tribe above self. Imagine what would happen if all of humanity decided to submit to a greater power, like God the Creator, right? To submit to her man, right? All of a sudden, she has to be tribe above self, where the heart temple is promoting everyone else's pursuit of happiness, where the mind temple is promoting order for everyone else, not for its own gain, but for the betterment of humanity, where the soul temple really is making good people on a consistent basis and not for its own benefit, where soul temple starts to, from its sin nature perspective, believe that they are the only good people out there. No. Or the body temple, where it allows everybody the opportunity to have a legacy instead of putting their legacy above everyone else, for example, within these worldviews, right? This ends up creating this huge cycle of harmony versus conflict, which means, as a result, I have no choice but to conclude humanity will only have short-lived harmony, also known as peace, and short-lived war, and be an endless cycle until such time the Creator is willing to unite with humanity and lead humanity towards the direction of tribe above self instead of self above tribe. Because all four temples will devolve into the solipsistic self above tribe perspective every single time. When body temple does it, we may lose the world. When the heart temple does it, it becomes, my happiness above your happiness. It's like a dog-eat-dog world at that point. It's survival of the fittest. That's really what ends up happening if heart temple is in that perspective. Mind temple, it's slavery, enslaving everybody else. And soul temple is ultimately corruption. And that's what happens with their solipsistic expressions. Tribe above self expressions, the masculine expressions of the temples, ultimately are something far better. They're the opposite of those things. Having that integrity for the soul temple, right? Yeah. Promoting everyone else's freedom and access to knowledge. So that's the thing about mind temples, that when it's in charge, it actually prevents other people from learning. Why are always slaves always forbidden to read? Think about that, right? Think about that. Are we not slaves right now with our public school system? What things in our public school system are just entirely ignored and not taught, for example, right? What things are being introduced instead in our schools? This is why if I ever become a warlord and I ever have the opportunity, like the prophet Elijah, my favorite prophet, also known as Ilyas from the Muslim perspective, that my very first target would absolutely be the education system. I would bring it to its knees and fundamentally transform it and replace it, because it just has to go. That way everyone will have the opportunity to fulfill their pursuit of happiness, right? These are the worldviews of the four temples. These are the consequences of the solipsistic worldviews as well as the masculine worldviews. The thing is that from my perspective, I personally think that it is impossible for humanity to get to that masculine expression of the four temples from a tribe above self perspective without submission to the Creator, without having this external divine intervention at this point. I literally think it's impossible. It's like that dream of Star Trek, for example. However, Mind Temple does have another theory about it, and they actually played with this, and this is actually exposed in Bill Cooper's book, On a Pale Horse. I highly recommend it. It's very woo-woo and very ridiculous. The guy's like trying to sell you on the existence of aliens, which technically, according to the Quran and as well as according to the Bible, aliens do exist, but whatever. But the point is, Mind Temple believed that if they could manufacture some kind of external threat upon the earth, humanity would be united and be forced to have a tribe above self perspective in order to unite humanity underneath one flag to deal with this so-called external threat, fake or real, right? So when humanity comes under threat, because its solipsistic survival nature ends up kicking in, it's at that point that humanity all of a sudden starts thinking about tribe above self instead of self above tribe for the sake of survival. Why else do you think that in times of trouble, all of a sudden there's always a baby boom in every single, situation? That's what happens. All right, it's time for Q&A. We haven't done Q&A for Cutting Edge in a while. So, avail me of your questions, folks. Avail me of your questions so that I can definitely watch them, to that end. Do you think Atlantis suffered from body temple solipsism? Yes, I absolutely do think that, Uber. Absolutely. Hands down. Absolutely I do. I do believe Atlantis did the same. And I think what Tesla would have brought to the world also probably would have done the same. Duggo asks, can you clarify when you say temple is pragmatic or affiliative, it's because of the types and the origins in the Rosetta Stone and not the actual God functions? No. I am basing it on the themes presented as a result of translating God functions into worldview based on the inherent nature of the temples as a result of combining the God functions together and how the God functions work together at the service or as the temples are in service of the God functions. That is my perspective, Mr. Duggo. I also leave it up to you, Kenny and Harry, actually. Break down what I'm saying and try to see if you can expose a system, between the functions and how it all relates together. Even go so far as the temple spokes on the wheels. If you could actually identify that, I would love to have that discussion on meetings in the near future. Tamared, I would love the compatible pattern away. How is this possible? Let me see. Cancel. Come on. I would have thought that the temples would have been compatible in the pattern way of function compatibility, as in the body temple functions synchronizing with mind temple functions. How is this shown? Well, that depends. Are they exhibiting that solipsistic perspective where they're trying to enable each other through the natural pair? Or is it through like the opposite, opposing natural pair, which is camaraderie? Tamarid, you must consider that. Duggo says, so then how is saying I know best so that you should do this is affiliative? Because the mind temple is the source of the affiliative. The mind temple is the one that crafts the affiliative. That's why. It is the source of the affiliative while the soul temple consumes the affiliative, right? Whereas the heart temple is the source of pragmatism and the body temple consumes pragmatism. Now that's a crazy concept for you, but that's why. Any other questions? If mind temple's God functions are TISE, why isn't it in the cognitive reflection with soul temple? Yeah, we should probably actually talk about that. Chris Taylor, please make a note, or anyone who's watching this on the member of the team, make a note that needs to be added to cognitive mechanics. It needs to be added to season 18. Please make a note of that and make sure that the creative team discusses that on the next creative team meeting. That's very important. Thank you for asking that question. That's a very relevant question. All right. Cool. Thank you, Chris, for actually verifying there. So, all right, folks, I actually have to get going. It's very important. I have a meeting, and I'm 5 minutes late for said meeting. So, anyway, folks, thanks for watching and listening. And I'll see you guys in the next Cutting Edge episode next month. And thank you for being here for my first street stream. It was a lot of fun. So, See y'all later.